Welcome to energyandpersonalexcellence.com and my other websites. This is Sachin Karnik speaking. I want to welcome you to a mutual exploration regarding the extraordinary organ that is in our heads that is known as the brain. So I want to get into that today, and there will be many recordings subsequent to this on this point or on this subject. The first thing I want to express is that the brain, which is an anatomical structure within each of us, each human being, is a highly robust and well developed organ. So it has a tremendous amount of ability or capacity to change in response to environmental demands. So what we consider as our own brain is not something that is static. In fact, it has a great deal of ability for changing in a variety of different ways. And this process of changing, or this ability to change, is called plasticity, technically. So this plasticity exists, and given the fact that it exists, a decision we need to make in our lives, including me, is what is it that the brain is actually evolving towards, or what is it changing towards? And this is a very difficult question to answer because we know from a neurological point of view that the brain is a series of chemical responses and signals between nerve cells, and there are thousands and thousands of connections. So from a more psychological point of view, a decision can be made each day regarding the type of growth we want to see happen in our life. That's more of a personal, cognitive, and slash emotional decision about what we want to see occur in our life. And when we make those kinds of decisions about the way we want to see each day unfold, we are changing the way the brain functions, and in fact we are tapping into the plasticity of the brain, right? So the plasticity is the robust and well-developed capacity to change in response to environmental demands. So there are changes that occur due to the environmental changes, and then we also have an inner environment that we can change by our own vision of what we want to see happen in our life, what we want to see evolve in our life. So, the plasticity involves creating and strengthening a variety of neuronal connections and weakening or eliminating others. Right? So, when various neuronal connections are strengthened by experience, by environmental contact, and by one's own meditative, contemplative exploration of the mind, then there is plasticity. So there is a stimulus response process, conditioning process that we're aware of with regards to the brain. And of course, there is what we would call the homeostatic state of the brain, which is functioning optimally in the most balanced way. There is that, of course. And then there is a meditative exploration about the nature of one's own mind. And then, of course, the brain. So the brain is not something that one can meditatively explore, because it's an empirically observed phenomenon, or it's a process that is occurring occurring very much physically. It's a physical organ, so you're not going to be able to close your eyes and see your brain. I mean, usually I don't believe that's possible. But meditatively, one can try to grasp the nature of the mind. So is the mind different from the brain? That's a classic question. Some opinions are they're the same. Some opinions are that they are different. Whatever it may be, the fact is that we have the ability to perceive thought and emotion and memory and desire. So thought, emotion, memory, desire. These are processes that are occurring within us. And the contention that I am making here, as well as many philosophers and many in meditative traditions have made, is that the thoughts that we have, the emotions, feelings, memories, all of these things that are existing within us are part of our subtle self, or what is called the subtle body. And they are not actually who we are. Who we actually are, we do not know, and we can find out, through meditative exploration and other ways also, what we actually may be. So generally we act as if we're the mind. Mind meaning thought, emotion, memory, desire. But is that really what we are? Again, these are questions that can be debated, and really from a neurochemical point of view, the position taken by many neuroscientists in the current era, in the current time period, is that we are just a computer, essentially. We are a neurochemical computer, and that's all we are, and the mind is just an emergent quality of that brain, and consciousness is some type of illusion. This is kind of the contention that hard determinists would have. And in fact, they have that. That's their perspective, and I'm not here to argue against them or for them or anything like that, because it is definitely a perspective. It is a perspective based on the knowledge of the brain and the mind and the body through our own senses. We are studying the outside world, and in studying the outside world, we also study the body. And in studying the body, we study the brain. So there is quite a bit of interesting evidence, really, neuropsychologically, which is pointing towards the fact that the mind is nothing but the brain. That the brain is really just an input-output device, and it's a massive computer that is running and creating the experiences that we have in life. How it exactly does that, nobody really knows. But the fact is, if we go through this carefully and slowly to understand what is a brain, we know that the brain has neurons and there are neurotransmitters. We know that neuronal connections occur, and that there is strengthening and weakening of neuronal connections. We know that. Now, we also know that the degree of modification with regards to the neuronal connections depends on the type of learning that takes place. And that's with regards to long-term learning that can actually lead to much more profound modification. So the degree of modification in the neuronal structure is based on the type of learning that occurs. Now, what do we mean by learning? Well, that's a big question. I think in very simple terms, we can think of it as it's experience that is occurring that is reflected upon and stored, and then hence that is learned. That's one way to think about it. But if you look at it another way, the way Socrates and some other philosophers thought about it, they believe that learning is actually nothing more than a reminder of what we already know, of what's already inbuilt and hidden within us is just awakened. So for example, all mathematical knowledge is already within us. But when we study mathematics, we're just remembering the mathematics that's already hidden within us. It's triggered and it's awakened, and then we recognize, and that's why we understand that, oh, that makes sense. Like, for example, when we say something makes sense, it makes sense because it's already with us at some level. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. So that's another perspective. So there's two ways of looking at that. One way is to understand it in terms of the outside environmental stimulation, and then the brain is somehow through its interconnections, its neuronal connections, is creating this learning process. And then there is a psychological sense that I have learned something, and that goes into memory. That process does occur, obviously. That's not to be denied. But from a more intuitive point of view, from a more philosophical point of view, or maybe a more meditative point of view, one may say that whatever we are experiencing as learning is actually all with us all the time. It's just dormant within us, and it's been brought to consciousness, or is brought into consciousness, that, oh, I understand this, I see this. It's like seeing something new, but that seeing something new is actually just remembering what's already there within you. So anyway, that's something worth contemplating on, and even going into further dialogue and debate on at some other time. So moving ahead with this, the process of learning, of course, begins in infancy. So there's a lot of modification that occurs in infancy, and the learning process begins there, where extraordinary growth of new synapses occurs. So many different new synapses are occurring during that infancy time, and then it really goes back to parental attachment, the exposure to the environment, the exposure to different stimuli, and then the brain is developed based on that. So for example, those children who have experienced trauma as infants, wind up having problems throughout their entire life, many times. There's even this whole area called trauma-informed care that helps, that is aiming to resolve the old traumas. So it is incumbent upon all of us to become very aware about not creating trauma in children, in any way. Not all of it can be necessarily avoided, but much of it can. So that's a more preventive angle to this. But the fact is that infants do experience extraordinary growth of new synapses. Now that's the biological process. But when the new synapses are being developed, what is the experience of the individual in the development of the new synapses? Well, there's language acquisition. There is ultimately a sense of identity that will develop. It's all a neurological phenomenon, because if you don't have the brain, there's not going to be any life of any kind. So these new synapses are creating the individual, which is the biological entity, the psychological entity, and the biological entity. So the key point here is that plasticity, or neuroplasticity, is a core feature of the brain throughout one's life. So the ability of the brain to grow and develop and change and modify and enhance connections and break connections and cut connections, all those kinds of things, or weaken connections or eliminate them. All of that is part of plasticity. And I think as human beings who are alive in this world, it is our personal responsibility to recognize where we are in the present, what is happening mentally, physically, psychologically, relationally, emotionally, and to recognize that all of that is related to or occurring as plasticity within the brain. Because that change within the brain, the structural changes within the brain, are all occurring as a result of the interaction with the outside environment, a result of our own desires that are coming up from the experiences of the past, and so many other factors are involved that are essentially creating our day-to-day experiences. And then the way we are moving through the day with our own willpower, making decisions of different kinds. So all of that is part of neuroplasticity, and part of the personal excellence program is to recognize the damage to one's energy, which I have talked about over and over again, and I will keep talking about that because invariably we all continue to damage our energies, our energy structure. And my contention here is that we must recognize how we are damaging our energy structure, because that energy structure damage is actually damage to the brain, is damage to the neuronal connections, it's damage to the potentiality of the brain. For example, negative emotion, worries, tensions, fears, addictions, these kinds of problems or conflicts, these are all damaging to the brain. And if we can keep that awareness alive, that all of these negative emotions and negative feelings and conflicts and interpersonal problems and all such things are causing damage to the plasticity, to the fluidic and healthy plasticity of the brain. If we keep that awareness alive, then our actions will be in accordance with what is actual health for the brain, which is health for the body and for the mind. Because the brain is the central organ that will control everything, and that does control everything. So every decision we make about food, just as an example, what to put inside the body, it's a neurological process. Decision comes from the brain. And then, of course, what if we eat the wrong kinds of foods, let's say, that's going to impact our heart, our kidneys, our blood, so many different things. The same thing is true with behavioral processes. So let's say, for example, someone has a shopping addiction. Well, they're going to damage their finances. They're going to damage their relationships, perhaps. May damage their credit report. So those behavioral problems, like shopping addiction or gambling addiction or some other kinds of behavioral addictions, these things can, and in fact they do, change the plasticity of the brain in a negative way. And I'm just putting it that way. The brain doesn't really know about negative or positive. That's something that we are saying psychologically. But it changes the way the brain works, and it changes it in a way that is not going to promote actual health. So underlying our discussion today in this exploration of the brain is the concept of health. And that the word health is not just a concept, it's the reality that we want to live in. Why should we not be healthy? In this program, I'm making a stipulation, or making a very clear statement that we can take charge of our health and build our health to the best of our ability, if that is what we want. It goes back to desire. Thought, emotion, memory, desire. What is it that we really want? Do we want to be healthy? I think most people would say yes. Well, if we want that, then can we stay on that track day to day in alignment with that, with emotional satisfaction, where there is recognition that the brain is actually healing and it's actually getting stronger by us remaining healthy. So none of the ideas that we're discussing in all these different talks and recordings and dialogues, these things are not independently existing. They're all interlinked together. So anyway, the point is that profound processes exist within the brain, and plasticity is one of the core features, or it is a core feature of the brain that exists, throughout one's life. So it doesn't matter how old someone is. It could be from an infant, all the way to the very elderly people. Everyone's brain is changing. We have to decide, what is it changing towards? Now that may be, or that I believe that's also a very intimate question, and it is also a question regarding consciousness. What kind of consciousness do we want inside of us? And I've talked about this before in some other places, that we live in different worlds. Someone, for example, who is working at a grocery store, when they're working there for the last 30 years. Well, that entire world and all the stuff that goes on in there and all the different transactions that go on, everything, that's in their mind. That's a world that person lives in. Same person comes home, it's a different world. So each person has their unique world and multiple worlds that we live in. And to recognize that we're shifting from one world to another, but can we shift in the different worlds without intrapsychic and interpersonal friction? So that question is very much related to the question of plasticity. So when there is emotional friction, we feel that. When there is intellectual chaos, we feel that. When there's conflict, we feel that. When there is worry, tension, fear, when there's physical imbalance, when there is physical health problem, we actually viscerally, emotionally, mentally feel all of this, right? So that's our experience in life. And that experience in life is our barometer, is our indicator of where we are with regards to neuroplasticity. The neuroplasticity can be seen to some extent through these various brain scans like fMRI scans, PET scans, CAT scans, etc. There's a bunch of different scans available, and they're more sophisticated ones now also. But they're still only touching the surface. They're just touching just an aspect of what's happening in the brain. The actual reality really can be recognized by the level of imbalance and turmoil within one's life. And the Personal Excellence Program, the Energy and Personal Excellence Program, is about the recognition of the turmoil and then stopping that turmoil by taking every possible step that one can take by utilizing the services available, utilizing the doctor's help, utilizing family, getting assistance from wherever possible to reestablish excellent balance, and from that balance to reestablish and to promote a very healthy form of neuroplasticity. So in this process, there are optimal or sensitive periods during which particular types of growth occur in the brain, particular types of learning occur, that are the most effective. And those periods depend on a variety of different factors. So the sensitivity that naturally exists within the brain, and the way that sensitivity manifests itself throughout one's life is a realization based on the stage of life and what we are wanting to see happen at any given stage. Because every stage has its own challenges, its own dictates, its own set of developmental tasks and developmental possibilities. So the optimal or sensitive periods during which particular types of learning are most effective, must be recognized by us because the effectiveness of living each day in the best possible way, or to put it another way, to effectively live each day with recognizing that there are sensitive periods that occur. And sensitive can be very positive, can be negative also. Like death of a loved one can be a bereavement period, sensitive period. Very positive period could be something like getting married, or some good, or graduating, or something like that. So these things are shifts in life, and then they are experiences that are existing for further development and further growth. So implied in all of this is the recognition that stagnation is not in any way healthy for the brain. A life that is stagnated does not allow the brain to naturally evolve its plastic behavior, its further evolution and further development. So stagnation is a type of psycho-emotive locking. It's a person is locked up and stagnated. And that is not going to promote growth and development. So if one is feeling stuck somewhere in life, well, if you're feeling stuck somewhere, start taking steps physically, emotionally, intellectually, relationally, to not be stuck there, but to recognize one is stuck is the first step in being unstuck. If one is not even recognizing that, then how can one get unstuck? So the recognition that one is, quote, stuck somewhere is a recognition of the fact that energy is trapped, the fact that the brain is not evolving further, or it's not evolving the way it can potentially evolve, because that's the barometer, But one has to look at that and see, okay, wait a minute, am I really stuck somewhere here, or am I satisfied? Satisfaction is different from being stuck, obviously. So these are all points to keep in mind. Again, this is just an introductory recording on the brain and some of the key ideas regarding neuroplasticity. There's much more to say about all of this, but in summary, the key point that I was trying to make here, or that has been made here, is that the brain is continuing to evolve throughout one's life. There are interesting periods of sensitivity which need to be really looked at, and how to progress in those periods is really very, very critical to grasp. And the fact that that plasticity is a core feature of the brain. It is one of the main features of the brain. It is a core feature, if not the core feature. It is definitely a core feature that has been scientifically determined by neuroscientists and neuropsychologists and so many others. So on that basis, my request is for anyone listening to this or interested in this to continue the dialogue process, to continue to evolve further. If you're enrolled in the program, that's well and good. If you're not enrolled in the program, you can still, I'm pretty sure, find some of these ideas these interesting. And always you can contact me through email or through phone or through message or whatever, and continue the exploration process. All right, thank you very much.